Every year that passes and the older I get, the more intrigued I get about history. And as analog gaming is my bag, I'm fascinated by the weird and wonderful quirks of fate and discoveries that constitute trivia about how this glorious hobby of ours came to be. As such, I thought we might embark upon a little journey that may have just one episode or many. The idea is that you come away from the next few minutes with a raised eyebrow or two, and a handful of conversation starters for the next time you find yourself smack bang in the middle of an awkward silence. So let us start at the very beginning, to the very oldest of games, Senet, which we attribute to have been invented, or at least well known, circa 3000 BC. That's right, an over 5,000 year old racing game, similar to the game of backgammon we still play today. A race game where the aim is to get your pieces off the board before your opponent can. Well, as it turns out, the most lame and famous pharaoh ever, the boy king Tutankhamun, was a boss level player of the game, evidenced by the fact that 4 copies of Senet were buried with him in his now famous tomb. Presumably because, like a chess grandmaster, he could play 4 people at once and still wipe the floor with everyone. Okay, I may have used some poetic license with that last part. A rulebook, they say, is just as liable to crush one's spirit than it is to unlock the door to your next favourite game. Still to this day, it's not a document template that has been uniformly mastered. Is there even such a thing as the perfect rulebook? Well, I bet you it would have been a darn sight easier writing instructions for a game that BGG users rate as a 1.25 on the complexity scale. Said ultra lightweight game was the Royal Game of Ur, a cousin once removed of the previously mentioned Senet, and a game for which the earliest surviving written rules were discovered. This tome, inventively entitled The Rules of Royal Game of Ur, left us with no doubt in how to play this truly historic game, unlike older titles like Senet that we have had to deduce the rules for. Now, I think most people can agree that chess is up there with one of humanity's greatest recreational inventions. It is revered in many places across the world, and I expect it's as popular as it's ever been today. However, as deterministic as modern classic chess is, with its millions of openings, billions of endgames and trillions of game states, its ancestors weren't afraid to sprinkle a bit of luck and randomness into their rules. Chaturanga, for example, which may well be the progenitor of chess, had common variations that included the rolling of dice to see what pieces you could move. To be fair, its bishop was also meant to be an elephant and it could jump over pieces. So at what point do we think they were just taking the mickey a bit? Maybe in the grand scheme of things though, that's not in the same league as the liberties taken by the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great in the 16th century, who, not satisfied with playing Pachisi, the 6th century and so 1,000-year-old progenitor of Ludo, like normal folk would, with cloth and cowrie shells like, decided he wanted his board to be made of stone, and life-size to boot. You can see where I'm going with this, right? Yep, the cheeky bugger instructed 16 of his female harem to act as the playing pieces. Now, I've heard of pimping out your ball games, but seriously, this is completely uncool, man. Come on. Launching forward a few centuries, we come to the subject of Monopoly, a game loved and loathed in equal measure. Monopoly was originally conceived as the landlord's game, invented and developed in 1903 by Elizabeth McGee, an American writer and activist. The game was designed to highlight the problems of wealth inequality. It had 2 rule sets. One, the familiar monopolist rules where players hoarded land and tried to bankrupt opponents, and the other, the anti-monopoly rules where all land was publicly owned and rent was shared to create wealth equality. The vicious irony is that Elizabeth was chiselled out of any meaningful and ongoing royalties, first by the cheeky bugger that sold it to the Parker brothers as his own design, and then by the P Bros themselves when they bought the patent for about 11 G's in today's money. Out to sniff at, I suppose, but they also removed all credit whatsoever for the game's true designer. Long live capitalism, I suppose. The game itself, however, became a useful tool of concealment during World War II, as board game boxes, many of which were of the Monopoly variety, were specially adapted by British intelligence to help Allied prisoners of war escape the Germans. Disguised as humanitarian aid packages, they contained maps made from silk that were hidden between game boards to avoid damage if they got wet, compasses hidden with the pieces, and files in the spines of the board. Perhaps most cunningly though, real money was interspersed with the fake Monopoly money. We'll call that the deluxe edition. They even managed to hide escape instructions in with the game rules. Absolute genius. Well played, MI9. Well played. If you thought going back to our Elizabeth, the landlord's game McGee was multi-talented, ours about a shout out to Monsieur Albert Lamouris, a French film director, famous for his short film The Red Balloon, which, I kid you not, has a sentient but mute red balloon as the co-lead. We're pointing the spotlight at Mr. Lamouris though because he also designed a little known diplomacy and conflict game named Risk, originally released in 1957 and entitled La Conquête du Monde, aka The Conquest of the World. Risk was bought by those bleeding Parker brothers 2 years later and tweaked somewhat to become the game of global domination we know it as today. Time now to take a sideward swipe at our old friend chess. It's long been considered that drafts, or checkers depending on where you are in the world, is a training wheels version of games like chess, which is a fairly pointless analogy, but hey ho. We're here however to give chess a dose of its own medicine. Now, if we cast our minds back to the 1990s, it was quite the hullabaloo that the reigning chess world champion Garry Kasparov started having matches with computers. And whilst GCASP had some early success, the robots finally won the day in 1997. However, it took almost 20 more years for a computer to beat a human opponent in a game with exponentially more possibilities. Go. An abstract game whose modern rules were codified long before chess is basically the boss level of abstract gaming. I of course say this with tongue firmly in cheek so as to avoid the inevitable flaming. They of course both contain an incredible amount of depth and strategy. Just one slightly more than the other. Ooh. We spend all our lives not questioning why things are the way they are. They just are. But what happens when you do peek behind the curtain? Take for example a regular deck of playing cards. Okay, the numbers make sense, it's a universal language for God's sake. But what about the face cards? Well, given a detailed background of playing cards would be its own video, but did you know that the kings were inspired by historical figures? The King of Spades being King David, he of the historical narrative David and Goliath. The King of Hearts is meant to be Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. The King of Diamonds, Julius Caesar, the infamous Roman general and dictator. And the King of Clubs, Alexander the Great, the King of Macedonia and ruler of the Greeks. Let's finish today's video then with a bedtime story about the number 20. They say that 2 multiplied by 10, which just so happens to be the number we find ourselves on this list, is 20. I've not been able to prove this myself, Terence, but I trust people. 20 is also the number of sides on the dice that has become so ubiquitous with the parent of modern role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. Would it surprise you though to find out the D20s were first made over 2,000 years ago, with the earliest discovered in Egypt, made of stone and glass, and then in ancient Rome a few centuries later made of rock crystal. It's been surmised that the Egyptians used them for divination and the Romans used them for fortune telling. No wonder the ignorance that caused the satanic panic in the 1980s smelt a rat when this brand spanking new phenomenon had a 20-sided polyhedron as its centrepiece. And with that, we say good afternoon, good evening and good night. I hope you've enjoyed this trip down trivia lane and that it becomes of great use to you entertaining folk in your future endeavours. Alas, I've been the voice of Benji, and this video has ended.